This is the Convo Lounge. Expression, exposure, experience.
Right, we are back like we never left with season 2 of the Convo Lounge Podcast. My name is Bakang Tumetse and I'm fresh out of the US. I'm an award-winning superstar. Okay, let's get serious now. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. And Yandile, season 2.
Hi.
Season 1. That's all that we're going to be talking about for today's episode, and just our journey, how we've came from where we started, how rough it was, and how we got to the point where we are now. I feel like we are on the right path. I don't know how you feel about that. You let me know. But I think as how we're going, we really are getting to something good, something that we're onto something.
Absolutely. I think if it were up to me, I'd say season 1 was a success. In fact, I think we've learned a lot of things, but more so around the value of podcasting. It's still a relatively new market in bots, and I think we've got about 15 to 20 podcasts in the market now.
More coming every week.
And more coming, new introductions every other week. And so you tend to have conversations around, is this a worthy investment? Because, content production is time consuming, it's expensive. On average, you've got a team of about 4 to 5 that you need consistently on production. And so I think one major highlight for me from season 1 was having, someone watching and being able to convert them watching our podcast into a strategic partnership.
Yeah.
We'll reveal more about that in the following episodes. But if you recall, in our first episode, connecting talent communities with brands to solve unemployment.
Yeah.
And trying to find out whether or not the actual brands that want to invest in finding out what their experience would be like if they interacted with more talent mo Botswana, whether they're in primary school, secondary school, or higher academic institutions, to solve this issue of unemployment. And I'm happy to come back to season 2 and say that there is a brand that has jumped on board to work with us beyond the podcast itself, as an extension of the podcast, to explore engaging with young talent in Botswana. So I think that was a success.
Yeah. And actually, when you say that, there was a question that I asked you on our first episode. So if you are listening and you haven't checked it out, please go and watch that episode. I asked if we are creating a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. And I think looking at season 1, the high value talent that we got to host, the conversations, the content, you mentioned 20 plus podcast, and I feel like our content, it's content unmatched.
Yeah.
In our own space, I think we've gotten to find a niche of what we're trying to communicate to brands, and how people could actually relate with content that has been shared on mediums like this. And it looks with the brands that we got to work with in the past season, I've gotten to realize that there actually is an appetite for this. The question is just, how do we bring it out to other brands to actually understand more what we're trying to do with a Convo Lounge beyond just the podcast, because this is actually one form of what we're trying to do as Convo Lounge, taking the information that we collect from everywhere, doing the research as they are working with us to produce the content that we share with the people here. But then behind the scenes, how do we make sure that the information reaches to the young people that we so want to work with? How do we ensure that it reaches the high value talent that we've hosted in the past? I think season 1 also got to show us that Botswana has exceptionally great talent, that it shows hella the benefit of the education we're putting to the students, the investment that the government has put to the education of young people here. And it's just a matter of amplifying it and putting them out there and assuming spaces and ensuring that we build the Africa that we want to build.
I mean, the question was, are we solving a challenge that exists? And I think the answer was yes. The only thing that we'll continue to explore is our approach as a solution, the relevant one. And that's something that you continuously have to innovate and keep exploring. And as we implement, we'll grow during the process. And so, yes, definitely, the challenge of unemployment exists. Our theory that we need to focus more on research, I think with more and more conversations, we're realizing that yes, that is the case. And so it'll just be up to us to find out how season 2 unfolds with the strategic partner that we've got on board to then see what sort of impact we'll have towards talent in Botswana. I do know that for season 2, we will be focusing more on, I'm probably taking the cat out of the bag right now, but we'll mainly focus on 2 sectors. That's the creative sector, the value chain of the creative sector, and then 2, the mining value chain Botswana. How can we identify opportunities within these value chains via Convo Lounge and empower a young Botswana? So yeah.
And also just backed by education. I think one thing that came from the first season is that, of course, there might be some certain hurdles when it comes to the education system, Botswana. But what's good is that it showed that there are people who are actively working on solutions that are actually working towards solving some of these hurdles in our education system. And I think season 2 would actually get to have some conversations on how some young people or some people in our country are actually developing this youngsters from the grassroots level going up to say, how then do we teach them to tap into these opportunities that are presented in the creative space, like you'd mentioned, opportunities that are created in the mining sector. Looking at Botswana, it's a country that I would say was built on diamonds. And that diamond story, we need to find a different perspective to tell it, to say how has it been impactful to the people Baba Demo Botswana, and how do we continue now to advance? The mining industry is really advancing when it comes to your sustainability. That's what they talk about now. But how then do we communicate that to the young people in the country who would be potentially the future for our country?
I think podcasting, or, the Convo Lounge podcast, it's a platform for building narratives, shaping narrative. And what is a narrative? It's a series of stories that we tell either about ourselves, our capabilities, our potential, and our country. I think what we've seen, I think Botswana has one of the most valuable passports in Africa. Just looking at the number of countries that we can travel to. And why is that important? Because as you travel and you've got mobility, you get access to opportunities and to increase your social capital. A lot of people don't understand, or a lot of Botswana haven't unlocked that value, because how many of us travel and how many of us know how to translate the Botswana story narrative to at an individual level. We know the popular story of Botswana. We moved from being one of the poorest countries in Africa to being, one of the richest countries in Africa over a short space of time. And also, I think in the context of Africa, but even in the world, really, we're a classic leading example of how do you lead a country with strategic partnerships, public-private partnerships, which I now believe we're transitioning to not public-private partnerships, we're transitioning to public-private community-based partnerships. And, with Convo Lounge, I think season 2 is focusing on building a community of talent that it can actually deliver solutions to the challenges that we face. I think one thing we did with season 1 in terms of building narratives, we're also able to paint a picture and highlight or put a spotlight on different versions of young Botswana. Is it Tinashe that we had a conversation with? A young Botswana, he schooled go UB. He made sure he uses all the exchange programs that are at his disposal, and he was able to go to US, SA to get exposed to different programs, cultures, opportunities, able to get scholarships. And today he finds himself in Oxford University working for one of the global brands in the country. What's that? Is it Rolls-Royce?
Rolls-Royce, yes.
And he's doing something for that from a point of view of engineering. And we often have this narrative, really young Botswana, outside of Botswana to be able to get opportunities. Such platforms were able to build a narrative for a young Botswana. No, listen, you can start Botswana and go global, always having a global mindset. We're able to also highlight and put a spotlight on other young people in Botswana who are not Botswana. The story of Tavonga, who is not from Botswana, he's from Zimbabwe, but is considering getting citizenship in Botswana because he sees the value of positioning yourself from Botswana and building global businesses that are providing solutions to the world. So it's shaping the narrative and shaping the perception, the self-image that young people have of their country, but also that young people have of themselves, and to be able to now take that positive narrative or perception to actually do something. So season 2 is about, let's do something. Let's actually get into the ground and engage young people practically and see what comes out of that. So I think,
I think it's Botswana really is a country with great potential, and the young people of Botswana, they actually have that great potential.
But wait,
I'm gonna throw in my one America story.
So I was gonna give you, usher you into it so that it doesn't seem like you're big-headed. So I was gonna say, I think one of the other successes of the podcast was you were able to secure yourself a position into the Mandela Washington Fellowship cohort for 2023.
Yeah.
And of course, Convo Lounge was one of the things that got you into that, because I know that you've got certain questions where they asked you about social impact that you're making, but also what are your plans?
Yeah.
So that was a success, I'd like to believe. And if anybody remembers, we did start by saying on episode 1 of season 1, we actually started this based on support from the US Embassy and eventually turned into a podcast. So tell us about your experience and how's your outlook different now based on what you've been exposed to from one of the biggest economies in the world?
Yes, I think just going down to America really got to brighten the way that I see things. I have a different perspective of what I didn't have a clear understanding of what really Convo Lounge is about, because even just in my communication of what Convo Lounge is, I would have those different elements that I try to bring them down to it. So this Mandela Washington Fellowship, we've given a coach, somebody who becomes your mentor. You just have a conversation with him, like we are having a conversation now, what it is that you'd want to work on when you go back to Africa. And mine was, I want to continue working on this social venture that is Convo Lounge, which I've been doing for quite some time. And then me trying to explain it to him, he was like, you know what? You really just need to bring it down to the level of getting the person who you are targeting to understand exactly what it is that you are doing. And he gave me a very great insight of something that I've never really got to imagine. Having a board of directors is something that you would be thinking people who are, seasoned in a certain industry, or who could actually get you to gain something from them. But as a board member or somebody who is within the operations of what you're doing, you actually have something to offer from the bottom up. And he said that even if we could have somebody who is a board member as a student or a targeted person in whatever it is that we're trying to do, the person is going to actually help us shape a product that is actually targeted to them. And that is something that I think just as going on into the next phase of the Convo Lounge podcast, or just Convo Lounge in a whole as a company, this is something that we really need to bring on. And another thing is that there is so much great power in the network. There's always this thing that always sounds like cliche. They say your network is your net worth. And I got to realize that indeed it is your net worth. And somebody who you're having a casual conversation with, they might not have money, because we're always asked, what is your challenge? And the first thing that we say is money. But if Yandile knows somebody who has money, they could always just refer me to that person and say, Bakang is doing this great thing that I think you should actually give him an ear and you can talk about. That person is going to open you to another person. And that's something that I've not seen most of here in Botswana. People, Americans, they sort of always have someone they can refer you to. so that you could get something from them if they cannot offer you that help themselves?
I think the word you're looking for here is communities. And which is what I think the next phase of Convo Lounge is around. Communities are an asset, both for corporates to invest in building communities, whatever it could be. I remember there was a lady who came in through these side events from Forbes. And she's like, she came into Botswana. She's based in Johannesburg, I think. And she was like, where are the communities? Like a community for anything and everything. A community for creatives, a community for bikers, a community for people who are, against climate change. Where are the communities in Botswana? We don't have a lot of communities. I know that we have health communities where you've got groups of people who come together and, they run on weekends. But where are the communities? It's not something that is, we think of as an asset yet in the country. And so in Botswana, I think with Convo Lounge, based on your experience from the US, it'll be more around building a community of talent in Botswana, a community of talent that one can offer a strategic guidance to the elders or the leadership in the country, whether it's with policy or whether it's with how they run the organizations. I know we talk about the idea of mainstreaming youth voices into society. So Convo Lounge can be a vehicle for that. And at least that's our aspiration. I think the other thing, based on our interactions and based on what you've just said, if I was to summarize it, I'd say that, Convo Lounge is a platform, a springboard for access to opportunity through communities. So a platform where a young person knows that they can curate their own opportunities, they can have an idea, and they can move from ideation to building a product or a service. And it's a platform where age is not a barrier. This can happen to you at any moment, whether you're in standard 7, form 1, form 4, or whether you're in for year 4 in tertiary education. Let be that platform that enables a young Motswana to literally access opportunities.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Convo Lounge season 2, and we are getting it running. We're hitting the ground running. I am very much excited for it. I'm looking forward to the conversations that we are going to have on the podcast, sharing different insights with you, just not only painting the story of Botswana, but how also do we enable an access to community of Africans, because we really need to build the Africa that we want to see. There is the Botswana Rectified, the AFCFTA, and that is actually a good gain that I think just going forward, we really also need to find how do we get young people, or how do we get this narrative that we keep talking about and expanding it into Africa. Because the one thing that I got from America is they actually see us, Botswana, as we having a potential to be the startup capital of Africa, because they believe that in as much as our small population, Botswana would be a perfect place to test your product, your market, get your processes in order, and not, because oftentimes we would say we're creating products, but we are 2.3 million in Botswana. There is no market. But Africa is a population of billions of people that we actually can expand to. In our starting of Convo Lounge, we talked about AGOA, which is a policy where Africans are going to trading with Americans, the pipeline of having how to take our products from Africa to the US. And that is something that we actually could see as a market that we are moving into. There is also talks of BRICS, how South Africa and Brazil and everybody else is trading. How then do we as Africans see not only our small corners as a market, but actually expand to the rest of the world? Absolutely.
For more to look forward to, I think season 2 is going to be quite exciting. And just touching on what you're saying, this is a common narrative, Botswana's opportunity to be the Delaware of Africa. And I think we've got classic examples of, small sparks of hope. One of the conversations we're going to have here is with Mitepi Macheng, who's the co-founder of Youth Impact, one of the largest youth organizations in the country. And she shares a powerful story of how this started as an idea while she was still in university, go UB. And, this NGO, not only is it registered registered in Botswana. It started in Botswana as a testing market, but it's now across, it's running programming across 10 countries in Africa. It's also dual registered in the US. So there are practical examples of, the potential that you've just mentioned from a Botswana perspective. We also have the National Arts Council of Botswana that has now released a call for applications for the Mobility Fund, where a young person can get funded for up to 50,000 pula, just to travel. If they want to go to a conference in the creative sector, they want to go to a conference, they just have to submit that application and they get funded. So when you talk about things like the AFCFTA, the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement, where it promises the free movement of business persons, goods, services, as well as the movement of capital, one of the things we always talk about in Botswana is can an average Botswana afford to travel? And so such initiatives will be putting a spotlight on focusing on the creative sector in Botswana. So yeah, be on the lookout for that.
All right, that is it on Convo Lounge Podcast Season 2. Please do look out for that and do engage with us across our different social media platforms at Convo Lounge Africa. Just use that hashtag Convo Lounge Africa, hashtag making life brilliant. Cling, cling. Your last words?
No last words. Just follow all the social media platforms, join the community, listen in, give feedback. It's always great to get feedback, and looking forward to a fantastic season.
This is the Convo Lounge. Expression, exposure, experience.